Welcome back to another episode of DePIN State. I'm Nick Hawks. This is presented by Goldhawks, and on today's episode, we have Clara Tsao, founding director at the Filecoin Foundation. This episode is sponsored by Goldhawks and Associates, the most experienced DePIN consultancy in the space. We help projects develop strategy, messaging, and token incentives. We'll have a little bit more on us later in the show. Before we get started, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, smash the bell, all those things that helps us bring great guests like Clara to you. Clara, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm psyched. So I thought we'd just start with the really basic stuff. Is tell me a little bit about who you are, how you got to Filecoin Foundation, and then we'll talk about what Filecoin Foundation is.
Yeah, so my name is Clara Tsao, as you introduced. I fell in love with the Filecoin and IPFS ecosystem because I spent my entire career focused on tackling hard problems on the web. And for many of you that have been through the journey of trying to fix the web, one of the biggest challenges is really how do we build a web that is not incentivized off of monetizing off of user data? And today, if you imagine the big monopolies of tech, their business model is all built off of mining user data, selling advertising, and being able to make a profit out of that. And I think a handful of companies in Web3, their whole ethos is how do we cut out centralized parties like big tech to make sure that people can access information in its purest form as intended. And people are also not indirectly getting their information taken without their consent to be used in advertising or targeted ads. So when we think about centralized providers like AWS or Microsoft owning most of your data, there is an alternative out there where instead of being stored in a centralized provider, it can be decentralized and using blockchain and cryptography, making sure that data is also secure at the same time.
Got it. So, and you guys, if I'm getting it right, are one of the inspirations for Helium. So one of the kind of original DePINs, and this idea of like, hey, everybody putting in a little bit together and getting rewarded for that is a great way to build a piece. But that is kind of muddying the waters probably between Filecoin and Filecoin Foundation. Can you break down those two things?
Yes. So Filecoin is an ecosystem of many different companies. Protocol Labs is the company that started IPFS and Filecoin, sending out the white paper. But like all open source technologies, you can think about the Linux Foundation or Apache Foundation. It's really maintained by a network of contributors. And this is true and also in crypto. And so very much similar to that, the Filecoin Foundation is really there to ensure long-term governance of the Filecoin network. I usually say if you're looking at this as starting a new city, you need someone to build the sewer system, build the roads before the private companies come in and say, now I'm economically incentivized to build on top of this economy. So that is really our big mandate, is we think about things like security. We give grants to fund the smartest and most talented developers to build on Filecoin and IPFS. And we also think ahead and look at where the landscape is, how we can have strategic partnerships, how we can have events that really bring together all the amazing entrepreneurs and companies that are building in the Filecoin ecosystem. Filecoin itself is, again, an incentive layer to make decentralized storage work in the network that we've built out. But there are many people that hold Filecoin as a token, but at the same time, it really is used as a utility to make decentralized storage possible.
It's super cool just to see how all these different businesses or ecosystems work. One of the big things you guys do is the grant types. Can you walk me through maybe a couple different types or maybe examples of grants you give and start with either one?
Yeah, we give a lot of different kinds of grants out there. We've given small grants called micro grants just to get people started. We have hackathons that have bounties where people can just play around with our technology. The way that I think about evolution down our builders funnel is a great story is a guy who started a company called Lighthouse. He started off working and playing around with Filecoin and IPFS at a hackathon. And then he went on to work on a company that's building on Filecoin called Fleek. From there, he joined an accelerator in Singapore called Tachyon, got funding for his company called Lighthouse. And now they're building on Filecoin Virtual Machine. They're looking at interplanetary consensus, which is one of the newer technologies we've announced in our ecosystem. So that's kind of the entire journey. But throughout that, we definitely give different kinds of funding to support all kinds of organizations at different states. We also have funded a number of public goods for the Filecoin ecosystem, like Starboard, which is a huge dashboard just around ecosystem health. A lot of people need this kind of information. This is why I kind of use the government analogy of, we fund the dashboard so people can check the weather. They can check how things are happening in a way that everyone needs access to. But the incentive mechanism for starting and maintaining that may not be initially there in an early stage of an ecosystem.
Yeah. Now, you guys have been around for a while as far as on the Filecoin side, and you've really had some time to think about how you run the foundation side, which is really, as you said, kind of the governance side and making sure you're like the steward of the system. As we have all these newer DePINs popping up, is there any advice that you have for newer projects that you wish maybe Filecoin would have done sooner, or that you've just learned along the way is like, hey, this is a really important part that most people don't think of natively?
Yeah, I think the main function of any foundation is governance. I think a big misnomer a lot of people outside of crypto think when they think foundation is they immediately think a nonprofit, or they think of more of a traditional nonprofit in the charitable sense. We actually are built with two arms at the Filecoin Foundation. We have a Delaware C Corp arm, which is really focused on seeding and improving the Filecoin ecosystem and our technology. All of our developer grants go through that. We also actually have a nonprofit C3 charitable arm where we try to make sure we can lift up the broader decentralized ecosystem. Not every single foundation and crypto project is structured like we are, but I would say there is not really any standard way of doing a crypto foundation. I think every project has very different needs, but I would design it in a way that really ensures that the community feels like they can participate, that there is a neutral party that can be there to govern, and that you can find the mechanisms for the community to weigh in and be heard and feel like there is input that they are being able to be given. So an example is for us, when we think about how do we make a decentralized storage marketplace work, we have over 3,000 storage providers all around the world. And some of them might be running small mom and pop shops. Others might be running more enterprise grade data centers, right down the spectrum. But we started the storage provider working groups all around the world so that there's a forum for storage providers to talk about their regional needs. There might be public policy needs that are challenging that they're facing. And then we also have in-person community meetups for that community to get together and problem solve together. And that's what makes it so unique and special, is we definitely can have a lot more ideas come together when we create those channels. And I encourage anyone thinking about starting a crypto foundation or working on one to really keep that at the backbone, is the community is your core, and that you want to set up the right mechanisms to really hear the community, but also think about the funding mechanisms of things that would be really hard to exist if you didn't play that role of seeding that. So we do also give grants to community members that help contribute, moderate different channels. Think about these kind of public goods that exist in a normal city. We think about that also in a decentralized ecosystem like ours.
God, it's so rad to hear how long you guys have had to think about it and what you guys are doing with it. Let's take a quick break. We'll talk about today's sponsor, GoldHawks & Associates. We're a DePIN consultant firm helping projects with strategy, messaging, and token incentives. We run a blog for founders over at goldandhawks.com, produce this show, and most importantly, work with the core teams and communities of your favorite projects in the space to ensure tokenomics and incentives are fully aligned to build out some of the most badass physical infrastructure networks in the world. If your project needs help in any of these, check out goldandhawks.com. So, Clara, if we come back to Filecoin for this, people might see this and like, oh, super cool. I want to participate, maybe not just in Filecoin and run their decentralized storage stuff, but also help out with the foundation. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know if you guys are hiring, but what you guys look for when people come in to help?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we are so lucky to have is a huge, talented group of people, whether that's building startups on top of Filecoin and IPFS, or whether those are people that are working directly at the foundation or protocol labs. There's so many amazing talent that have left cushy jobs in Web2 or really prestigious research positions, right? To really think about incentive structures in Web3. And I I think the biggest advice I would give is really making sure that if you are if you're willing to roll up your sleeve, I think the challenge is you have to be very technical in crypto, but also very entrepreneurial. I think every week, every month, I think Nick, you can agree with me here, there are always new things happening, and people have to keep their neck up while they're building to really keep up with what is happening. I think even DePIN as a word wasn't really widely used till the last year or so, where we saw more and more activity of people finally understanding what DePIN is doing and what it actually means. But we've been around as a project. The white paper was first written in 2014, was more public in 2017. But we've been thinking about this issue for more than a decade now as an ecosystem. And I think a lot of people are finally understanding the physical side. And I think this is also an area where people who just don't want to work on just software or magic internet money stuff on the DeFi side, they definitely can see the physical interaction between what's happening within the network and also the physical data centers when they see a network like ours. And I think Helium is a little bit different, but definitely also very tangible to everyday users to see consumers actually use Helium devices and being able to interact with the Helium network. So I think this is really exciting because for people that are maybe in Web 2 that really like to see the physical side of crypto, DePIN companies, DePIN foundations, this is a great place to get your feet wet and also think about challenges also when you have to interact with a physical device, how to validate, how to think about setting up infrastructure in a way that isn't just software costs. And that's something that we think about a lot in making sure that everyone in our ecosystem that's participating in some way, they have the resources they need. But also there is a degree of entrepreneurial spirit in every single role at the foundation where people have to also adapt to what is happening in the macro environment.
Yeah, no, it's rad. And you guys are semi-famous now for a number of things. One of which is you've broken the Earth constraints and you got some stuff up in space. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe we define IPFS, so interplanetary file system, and how we're starting to go at least outside the planet with it?
Absolutely. So you mentioned IPFS, interplanetary file system. Around a year and a half, we decided that we really wanted to bring our technology up in space because this is a great way to help people also understand what makes decentralized storage so unique. So instead of two satellites, imagine in space, sending information to each other, but having that information have to go back down to planet Earth, then go back up before it reaches that other satellite. That's what, if you imagine a centralized storage system currently requires as a network. When you have decentralized storage systems in place across two satellites in space, you can now send that from A to B without going back down. And that is what we did exactly, a year and a half ago with Lockheed Martin, where we successfully completed actually sending files in space. Actually, a picture of
cool.
Our mascot Biscuit, which is a corgi holding a Filecoin. We were able to do that successfully, and we announced it in January at Davos. So it's really showcasing examples like that aren't just around buzzwords like DePIN or crypto, but really showcasing the real world examples of how our technology works, how it's different from current technology out there. I think is something that is so unique, and we need more use cases like this to really illustrate the beauty of what DePIN networks can enable.
Love it. Love it. Hey, I know you're super busy. Thanks a ton for taking the time to come on today. I'm excited to have a couple links down in the description for folks to follow along with what you guys are doing. But Clara, thanks a bunch for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.